Welcome and welcome back to the Eternal Self podcast. Today I'm starting a new series on Dina's new book, Sita's Yoga. And this is not Sita as mythology or Sita as a character in Ramayana. This is Sita as I see her, Mata Sita, as a living intelligence, as the force that teaches us how to remain anchored in truth, even when life presents us with n number of challenges. So, when we think of yoga, we think of postures, asanas. But Sita's yoga is the yoga of consciousness under pressure, the yoga of dignity without noise, the yoga of strength without spectacle. So, let that land, and then we invite Dina to the show. So, before I do that, I just want to say that this series is not about learning about the story of Sita, it's about recognizing where Sita, Mata Lakshmi lives within us. So, treat this as a doorway, and today we're going to be discussing the backstory of how this book came about with the author Dina Miriam, and also discuss the key messages from the first chapter. So, so before we start the conversation with Dina, I just want to set a bit of context about the book Sita's Yoga, the Yoga of Awakening. And in the introduction, Dina has set the context that this book has uh, it's not something that is her lived or past life lived experience. It's something that has come to her as a transmission from a, I could say, a very elevated soul who lived at the declining end of the Treta Yuga, a character in the book named Devani. And Devani was born in the Kosala kingdom at the time of Ram Rajya. So in itself it's fascinating to understand how did people in that time, the end of the Treta Yuga, how did they live, what did they feel about their king and queen, and what was the dynamics happening at the village level. So this character Devani, as Dina has put it in the introduction itself, she had a promise from Mata Sita, and while she was in the womb, she heard a subtle inner voice promising that she will find, that Mata will find her, and that Devani will know what liberation is in the next birth. And this promise of liberation, moksha, sustains her and is the journey of Devani as narrated by Dina Merir. So, uh, basically, the book goes into the struggles of emerging from a world of no limitations into the confined and three-dimensional world of a human body. And in this transition, how the spiritual abilities of human beings fade away and the divine voice becomes silent or replaced by the need to learn basic human skills like walking, talking, and living on earth. Also, Devani expresses how she could no longer see or hear the divine presence clearly after birth. And she felt comforted by an inner knowing and a different kind of mother's love that she experienced and retained, how she retained an internal sense that the goddess was always with her. So that's the context in which the book is set, and I seriously I can't narrate and give full justice to how it's been presented in the book. So treat this as an introduction and setting the context for our series of discussions on the book. But I highly, highly recommend to get yourself the book itself and have that lived experience of uh, Devani's journey through her lifetime. So, in chapter one, the yoga of inner attunement, there are a few points that I've picked out to discuss with Dina today. And the first key point, which took me onto a reflection, is the nature of inner attunement. And inner attunement, as described by Dina in the book, is nature's unspoken language, an intuitive inner knowing which is possessed by animals, birds, and humans alike. Now, this inner knowing guides behavior and it also ensures safety. It's the same inner knowing that birds get to know before a storm arrives. So, when the divine is kept foremost in one's thought, life flows smoothly and needs are met. And also, it's my interpretation that when the mind drifts away from that focus, frustrations and desires and greed and fears start to come up. So, that was my first aha moment, which I want to elaborate on this inner attunement and how Dina suggests that inner attunement to be enhanced or enriched in one's life. The second point in the very first chapter that struck a chord with me was that emotions are barriers to guidance and that inner attunement. So, strong negative emotions, specifically fear, they act as obstruction or they block that natural inner attunement. I would say, from a neuro science point of view, is that once the cortisols are released and you're in fight or flight mode, that inner attunement kind of gets shut down. Now, in the book, Devani loses her ability to receive intuitive guidance when she becomes consumed by the fear for her daughter's Sachi's safety. And ultimately, she is consumed by grief. And I don't want to give away the whole story here. I would like you to read the book. But the key message I want to understand from Dina from first chapter is how grief can trap a person in a bleak mental world that severs their connection with the divine. And what is the path to recovery and reattunement after experiencing a huge personal loss? And it's very beautifully articulated in the book, which definitely struck a very, very, strong chord for me. And in chapter 1, Devani then re-establishes her inner connection with Mata, and I want to pick Dina's brain on how one can do that in their lives. The final point in chapter 1 that we will be covering with Dina today is the karmic roots of relationship conflicts. A lot of people are loggerheads with a lot of other people, in laws or estranged relationships, and a number of dynamics where we are in relationship conflicts or could be in relationship conflicts. So, how do these conflicts have some roots from previous lives? And how can one entangle themselves from this constant cycle of action and reaction? Then again, let's wrap this up with the unspoken divine connection. The essential lesson of this chapter is to never let go of that divine hand, regardless of emotional turmoil, regardless of personal tragedies. And Mata, the divine, is always present and ready to embrace that person who seeks. So, but of course, the free will always comes to play, and the seeker must ensure that they are seeking and calling out for the divine hand to guide them and hold them through this cycle of uh, birth and death. So, without much further ado, we will continue this dialogue with none other than Dina Mirin. Namaste, Dina, and welcome back.
Day.
Welcome back to Eternal Self podcast. And today I'm starting this, as we had agreed that we're going to give a brief understanding and narration and interpretation of this beautiful book, which is by my bedside practically ever since I've got it. And it's something that I think I will keep going back to because I've just gained enormously, I have gained from going through the book. So we're starting this series of talks on every chapter, just brief kind of introduction because the concepts are really quite deep, Dina. And I mean, I cannot read more than one or two pages. That's my capacity. I'm sure everybody would be a different kind of reader. But for me, I go into a state myself after one or two paragraphs or one page or two pages, and I really enjoy that experience of self reflection. So I hope, like, everybody gets the taste of that experience. Any spiritual seeker, I would say, would, it's a delight. So, Dina, I've already given a brief introduction to who Devani is, how she came into, before her birth, her experience in the womb, and how she was promised that she would be shown or made to experience liberation in her upcoming birth. So that's all a beautiful context setting, and that this whole book is the journey of Devani, which has come to you as a transmission rather than this one book being like your past remembrance.
Correct. It came to me as a transmission. Although when I was writing it, I sort of like transported myself into that time, and it was a very moving experience for me. And I each chapter, it was like a teaching coming to me. And what I realized is we think of Ram and Sita as the epitome of the Dharmic life. So what is that Dharmic life? And I think this book lays out, how we free ourselves from things that keep us bound to the karmic cycle, the reincarnation cycle. How do we free ourselves from that? It doesn't mean, people have asked me that. It doesn't mean that we don't return to Earth, but we return not from karmic compulsion, but to serve, but to serve the whole upliftment of creation. So that is the story of how to free yourself from the karmic cycle of rebirth. And that's the teaching that Sita gave to those around her. And when you think about it, it makes total sense because obviously Ram and Sita took birth for a very profound purpose. It wasn't just to have a battle with Ravan and defeat Ravan. It was to show the way of how to live a dharmic life, which is why it's so important to get right the whole experience of Sita, because Sita's withdrawal. It's a very critical part is to know that Sita's withdrawal to the forest was part of her plan as well, as the fulfillment of a curse that had been issued to Narayan. But her heart was in the villages, and it shows by the way, which is very much like her father, Janak Baba, whose heart was in the villages. And in a way, she was fulfilling that dharma. As her mother says at the end of the book, we maybe haven't gotten there yet. She's living the life her father would love to have lived.
Yes, I haven't gotten that far as yet. Yeah. So today, Dean, I want to go a bit more into some key concepts that I grasped from the first chapter itself. And in the very first chapter, you've touched upon the yoga of inner attunement.
Very
And
important.
the concept of how animals, birds, and humans, we have that inner attunement already set in, but what keeps us away from that? Like birds and animals don't go away from that because they have their flight or flight moment, but their memory is so, that's how it's designed, that once they're out of that fight or flight, they go into their homeostasis and they're able to, I don't know how it works with them, but their inner attunement stays active. how birds can know before storms. You've talked about that in the book. But humans, because of our memory and emotions like grief and fear and traumas and everything, we lose touch. So, could you tell us more about how this inner attunement actually works for humans, and how can we, despite the human challenges of emotions that we have, how can we always, uh, how do we live with that inner attunement?
The difference between us and the animal world is free will. We have the ability to say, no, I don't want to do that.
Hmm.
So storm comes, the birds don't obsess about, well, do I want to leave my nest or I don't want to leave my nest? It's comfortable here. I'm not going to leave. Their natural impulse is to respond, and they don't give any thought to what the alternatives might be. But so when an earthquake is, even before an earthquake erupts, the animals are attuned, so attuned to the earth that they know to get into a safe place. Now we humans have that potential as well, but what counters that is our doubts, our inability to really listen because we're so filled with desires and thoughts and other things that we get obsessed with, and so we block out that ability to listen, to hear, to hear the inner guidance that's there, but it's become a very quiet voice within us because we block it out. And so, we have choices that other forms of life don't have. And so how do we learn to align our choices with what's in our highest good? Well, that takes countering many lifetimes of patterns. You know what it's like. You get up in the morning, you don't feel like meditating. You know it's in your highest good to meditating, but you have tamas or rajas. You either just don't want to do it or you want to do 1,000 other things you'd rather do. And so and that's been built into us through many, many lifetimes of patterns of behavior. So we have to use our will to and life gives us many opportunities, many lessons. So Devani was already it's a higher yuga, and she's already a soul who has passed through many trials before that birth. So she's already at an awakened level, and so she catches on very quickly. So when great tragedy befalls her, it takes her a little while, but she knows to grab onto the Devi's hand, to Mata's hand. And that's what pulls her out of it eventually. And she experiences a trauma that's a trial that's sort of one of the most extreme, so it's not a minor matter that she faces. And yet she's able to see the bigger picture through that experience. And this is the theme that comes up throughout the book because it was the Treta Yuga. We have to remember, and this is one of the things that sort of is just so mind-boggling to me about the way the narrative is told in the tradition. It's told through a Kali Yuga lens, not through what consciousness was in the Treta Yuga.
Yeah.
In the Treta Yuga, the consciousness was much more attuned to the divine reality, and much more open to spiritual truths. And so, it's she's able to see into the past. So when something happens to her, she's able to look back to the cause. And also, she's able to see into the future. As her life progresses, that ability gets stronger and stronger. And so, even if we can't do that, we know that there is an earlier cause to whatever happens to us. Nothing is arbitrary. There's an earlier cause. And there will be an outcome based on how we address that. We can make it a more positive outcome, or we can make it an outcome which causes us to repeat the lesson if we don't get the lesson right. In other words, if we don't act from our higher self, another opportunity will come to us to give us a chance to behave differently. So I think the first the first chapter is sort of like the basis of how we need to attune ourselves to our higher self. You can call it attune ourselves to divine will, to the Devi, to Mata, or to our higher self. It's all the same. And how do we sort of make that primary and make secondary our impulses, our desires, and our behavioral impulses? Either the impulse to rajasic activity or tamas, and so that we can move more smoothly through life.
So I'm thinking, Dina, there are these two words, raga and dvesha in yoga, rag and dvesha, which I think mean like attachment and so basically when we're talking of like because Devani goes through an extreme grief and she learns her lesson of overcoming it. In human terms, that overcoming grief in practical terms, what can one do? Like you said, fair enough, I get that it's a mind thing and it's free will and everything. But is there anything else that you'd like to add for people at this in this time and age? How to overcome grief? Is it the constant practice of meditation or anything else that you think?
Not, grief, for those of us who are, wherever we are on the path, the grief hits us. It's not something that is lightly or easily overcome. It's a process, because we do have human attachments, and we have to, in a way, have patience with ourselves and not suppress it, but allow ourselves. I mean, even when you know that you lose somebody that you love, even that if it's somebody who's in their elder years, there's grief, even though that's part of the journey,
Yeah,
because they need to move on to the next stage.
yeah,
You can't stay in this human body forever, nor do we want to. But still, there's grief. If you lose a loved one in their youth, when they're younger, that's double grief, right? Because you feel they haven't had the potential to live out their life.
yeah.
But even knowing that there's an earlier cause, that soul, for some reason that we can't understand, made that choice, even knowing that without being able to know the specifics, still you have to pass through that period of making peace with it. Sort of, I think one of the ways to overcome grief, and of course, this is just dealing with the loss of a loved one. There are other things that cause grief.
Sure.
The loss of a job that you love, the breakup of a relationship. There are many things that cause grief. Um, is to look at what can you gain from that experience? What do you need to learn? If there's a loss of a loved one, person leaves their physical form, there is a way, and not everybody can do this, I know, to connect with that soul and to stay connected to that soul, and to continue to express love to that soul. There are things that you can do to alleviate grief. If there's a breakup of a relationship, I guess to look within and say, what was my role in this? What am I meant to learn from this? Um, each thing that causes us suffering, we can learn something from it. We can grow through that experience. Suffering is only here to help us grow, and with whatever tools you have, even if you can't see to the cause of it, you can through deep introspection. Meditation is half the battle. The other is introspection, really observing yourself, observing your reactions, and trying to work with your reactions, and saying to yourself, how can I grow through this experience?
Yes, inevitably through suffering, the outcome sooner or later is growth.
Sooner or later, there's growth. And there's this story that many people have probably heard. When Baba Ram Das was struck with a very severe stroke, he called it extreme grace.
Yeah.
Extreme grace. And he said that he couldn't speak for quite some time, but eventually he did learn how to speak again. He was paralyzed on one side. He couldn't do anything on his own. He was completely, in the hands of other people who had to care for him. But he said that it was the greatest teaching that he could have had. So, he was at the point where he was able to say, okay, this has happened to me. How can I transcend it?
I think somewhere he mentioned that his communion with Hanuman became so much because that he had spoken so much in his life as such. He had given away like pearls of wisdom, undoubtedly, that transformed I don't know how many lives. And that period probably gave him the time and the window for him to go deeper within in his communion.
Yeah. Yeah. So we don't know why certain things come to us, but we can always use them for our growth.
Yes. Beautiful, Dina. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I think um I write through story. I mean, I express myself through stories. So the story of, I mean, and actually you have to get, it's interesting because I've given the book to many friends, and you can't just drop into one chapter. Oh, let me just look at the yoga of forgiveness, because it's a progression. The story is a progression of of her growth and her ability to see things very quickly, to perceive into what she needs, what the teaching is for her. So she continues in the first chapter, of course, she experiences an extreme teaching test, but other things then begin to come her way where she's able to grasp the teaching of it. And so eventually she goes through it's the development of the dharmic qualities. How do we develop, attunement, gratitude, generosity, forgiveness, all the qualities that transform an individual into someone who's here to seek the fulfillment of their own desires, to someone who's here in service of the Mother, the Divine Mother.
Yes. One more thing that's coming to my mind before we bring this to a close. Another thing within chapter one is her whole dynamics with this other character, Anu, and uh,
Yeah,
and must have surely had some roots in some previous birth together. But the question I wanted to discuss here today is that we do have relationship conflicts. People have that. And from reading your books, I understand that there is no effect without a cause. So once we have a cause rooted in the past, which is coming out as a conflict in the present life, how does one disentangle that cause and effect? Because if you're paying back to somebody else in this birth, that cycle may just continue for a very long time unless or until there is awareness of a karmic payback.
she's able to go into the past and to see her relationship with Anu, where that comes from. And then she's able, through the way, to see a total transformation in the character of Anu through the course of the book. And I think initially her reaction when she has a conflictual relationship is to withdraw, which is, I think, a natural reaction for many of us on the spiritual path. If something is difficult, well, you just withdraw. You don't engage, you don't want to engage in that level. And so that's her initial reaction. And it takes her a while to realize that was somewhat of a selfish reaction because she was protecting herself without helping to transform the relationship. And so somewhere along the way, she switches course and she begins to tend to this relationship, and it creates a transformation in Anu. And Anu has carried baggage with her, a sense of inferiority, and, which is not, we meet that people who sort of cloak their sense of lack of confidence into many different traits, but it really goes back to a lack of confidence, and it can come out in different ways. Sometimes in an arrogance, sometimes in jealousy. In this case, it came out in I don't know, in jealousy, and so Devani first just withdrew. She just didn't want to, you know, shake the the household. But she eventually learns how, and so this happens to her in other relationships. She learns how to heal relationships, and always with an eye to the future.
Hmm.
So there's the past and there's the future. The past has the cause, but the future is determined by what you do now. So if you don't heal the relationship, then you're watering seeds for that future. But if you can heal the relationship, which could take years to do. It's not something that we wake up one day and suddenly it's changed. It takes patience and persistence. And if you can heal it, then you're creating an outcome that is more positive for both parties. And so it's living, living in the present with an eye to the past and an eye to the future. And it is said that during Treta Yuga, people were able to transcend time. And I think they say in Dwapara Yuga, which is the age we live in now, at the very beginning, people can transcend space. And you see that we're doing that through the internet, through Zoom. We're able to overcome space. But in the next Yuga, which is a few thousand years away, you can overcome the limitations of time or the illusion of time. So it's easier to see the past, to see the future, to move between the different realities, and eventually they all sort of merge into one. Uh, so I think my hope is in the book it gives people, because the yugas are an external reality and an internal reality. In other words, at any age you can live in the highest consciousness, Sata Yuga consciousness, and at any age there are people who live in Kali Yuga consciousness, only the material consciousness. And so this book, I hope, gives people a sense of what it's like to live in that higher consciousness.
Beautiful. And Dina, to sum up what you just said about relationships in this whole conversation, is that as much as possible, if we can heal those relationships, the conflicted relationships in this birth, we're not going to carry them over in the same way of the cycle repeating itself.
Exactly. Exactly. You bring things to completion, and every life is an opportunity to bring things to completion. We sort of finish certain karmas and then we initiate new karmas, right? That's what most of us go through life doing that. But as we live more mindfully, we can bring things to completion and be more mindful of what we're creating for the future.
Yes. Brilliant. I'm just reminded of a personal experience, Dina. Just not too long back, I was just reflecting on all my relationships and how many relationships I've, wherever I had conflict, I've mended most of those relationships, be it with an ex-husband or a lot of other relationships that I've mended. But there was this thought that came to me that, there's unsaid and unfinished business with my ex-father-in-law. And I was like, I think probably I should pay him a visit. He didn't live too far from me. And that thought came, and the very next day I got the news that he's no more. So it was such a great loss for me to not be able to go back and say that, we've come a long way and I understand where you were coming from. And that, so I just wanted to share that if anybody feels that there is an unfinished conversation, an unfinished reconciliation that's left, they don't wait. Don't wait another moment.
That's an important point, but I want to add that you can continue to work on relationships even if the person has passed on.
Yes.
Years ago, I knew a woman who had a very difficult relationship with her mother, and her mother passed on, and she continued to argue with her in dreams. So, so things just continued on, and a relationship does not end when a person leaves the body. There are some relationships that it's best to leave for the future, because it may be that that person will be in a better situation at that time to be receptive. But one can also continue to work on relationships even after the person has passed on.
That's a great tip. I shall do work on that. Mhm. Lovely, Dina. I think we've done our time for this dialogue, and I thank you so much for the wisdom through the book and through your spoken words today, Dina. I look forward to the next conversation that we'll have on the next chapter.
Next chapter. Okay. See you then.
Namaste.